Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallim. Inshallah, God willing, today we're going to cover what I believe is an absolutely critical topic. And it is something that is a topic that cannot be ignored by the Ummah, by the Muslim community, and it cannot be ignored by the general public. That topic is the Wahhabi menace. So we're going to talk today about the background of Wahhabism. We're going to talk about its doctrines, its beliefs, its historical origin, and also, God willing, we will talk about how to counter the Wahhabi menace. Now, first of all, we need to be clear about the matters of the creed. Now, the Wahhabis, they are quick to rush forth and say there is no such thing as a Wahhabi. And there is a very, very strong chance that if you encounter someone and they say they are a Muslim, and they tell you that there is no such thing as a Wahhabi, this is a very strong indicator that the person indeed is a Wahhabi. Now, the Sunnis, talking about the overwhelming vast majority of the Muslims, we deem this sect, this movement, this fringe movement, we call them the Wahhabis to distinguish themselves, to distinguish them from the overwhelming body of the Muslims, known in Arabic as Ahlul Sunnah wal Jama'ah, or we can just say the Sunni Muslims. Now, the Wahhabis are quick to call themselves Sunnis, and nowadays many of them call themselves Salafis. They are doing this to masquerade who they actually are and what their origins are. And inshallah, God willing, we're going to expose that today. Now, the term Wahhabi, it was used by the Sunnis when this movement arose. The Sunnis called them the followers of a character named Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. So those people who fawn over this man, who follow him and claim him to be, quote unquote, a great sheikh of Islam, that these are the Wahhabis. And the Sunnis, they call them such, as was mentioned by the Mufti Sheikh Ahmed Ad-Dahlan, who in his book he wrote a section called Fitnatul Wahhabiyyah, the fitna, the seditions of the Wahhabis. So the Sunnis use this term Wahhabi to refer to the followers of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, and that is to distinguish that movement, this fringe movement, to distinguish the fringe movement of these people from, as we said, the Sunni majority. Now, when we talk about what makes the difference, the core difference between the Sunnis and the Wahhabis, or the Muslims in general, when we talk about the basic belief of what makes a person a Muslim and how the Wahhabi belief is different from the Muslim belief. So in Islam, the core of our belief in God, we're talking now about the belief in God, the belief in the Creator. In Arabic, we use the word Allah to refer to the Creator. That the belief in the Creator, as per what Muslims believe in the Creator, we believe in one perfect, incomparable, transcendent, meaning not in need of anything, transcendent, all-knowing, omnipotent Creator, who absolutely does not need or resemble any of the creations. So this is the basis of our belief about the Creator. And when we investigate the Wahhabi doctrine, we are going to see that they do not believe as Muslims believe. So as we just said, the Muslim belief, this belief in one Creator who is the only Creator, who has no beginning, who has no end, who is not similar to the creations, is not dependent upon the creations, who has power over all the creations. This belief in the Creator, it's called Tawheed. And now we're going to talk about a aspect of Tawheed. Tawheed means the oneness of God. It's referring to the oneness and the perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now when we talk about Tawheed, we're going to talk about an aspect of Tawheed which is called Tanzih. Because Tanzih is the antithesis of what the Wahhabis believe. Tanzih in particular talks about the incomparability and transcendence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Allah revealed in the Quran, وَلَمْ يَكُنْ لَهُ كُفُوًا أَحَدٍ, which means that Allah has no equal and is beyond all comparison. And Allah revealed, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, which means there is absolutely nothing like Allah whatsoever. And Allah Ta'ala revealed, إِنَّ اللَّهَ لَغَنِيٌّ عَنِ الْعَالَمِينَ, that Allah absolutely, categorically does not need any of the creations. And likewise, Allah revealed, Allahu Samad, which means that Allah is not dependent upon any of the creations, and all of the creations are dependent upon Allah. So this concept of Tanzih, it is the belief that God, Allah, absolutely does not need any of the creations and absolutely does not resemble any of the creations. One of the basic rules pertaining to this is the saying of the scholar Ahmed ibn Hanbal and Dhunun al-Misri. They both said a similar statement, مَهْمَا تَصَوَّرْتَ بِذَلِكَ فَاللَّهُ بِخِلَافِ ذَلِكَ, that whatever you imagine in your mind, Allah is different from that. So this is the belief. The Muslims are firm, we hold firm to the conviction that the Creator, Allah, absolutely, categorically, totally does not need or resemble the creations. That God is beyond all comparisons, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be fathomed in our imagination. Now, as related to this, one aspect of Tanzih is understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala exists without being in space, without being at a distance, nor in a direction, that Allah ta'ala is not subject to time, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not subject to change. All of this is under the topic of Tanzih, that the Creator absolutely does not need or resemble the creations. We know that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was asked about the genesis of creation, about the origin, the beginning of creation, and he said, كَانَ اللَّهُ وَلَمْ يَكُنْ شَيْءٌ غَيْرُهُ. He said Allah was existing, and there was nothing else in existence. Allah was, and there was nothing else. Allah's existence preceded light, Allah's existence preceded darkness, Allah's existence preceded time, Allah's existence preceded space and place. Allah was existing before the genesis, before the beginning of creation, and there was nothing else. And as we just said, that this is inconceivable. This is how we know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is unimaginable. We cannot imagine the Creator. And the Creator is absolutely not like any of the creations. So with that said, and we're going to talk more about this topic, that the Creator, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, is clear of having dimensions, that the Creator is clear of having size, that the Creator is clear of form and composition, that the Creator is clear of all of what are called jismiyya characteristics, just the characteristics of the jism. The jism means the spatial entities, and inshallah we're going to come back to this topic and clarify. So for the Muslims, we believe in absolute tanzih for the Creator, that the Creator absolutely categorically does not need any of the creations and does not resemble any of the creations. Now for the Wahhabis, they take the position which is the antithesis of tanzih, which is called Tashbih, which is resembling the Creator to the creations. Now, Tashbih can be either explicit, like a person may say, God is like the creations. For instance, the followers of Louis Farrakhan, they say that Allah is a man and could not be other than a man. This is blasphemy, bila shak, with no doubt. So these people, they explicitly, blatantly claim that Allah Ta'ala is a human being, i.e. is similar or is a creation. As for the Wahhabis, they are guilty of Tashbih, but they do not say in their words, they do not say explicit statement that God is similar to the creations. But what they believe is it implies that. It implies that. And why do we say that? And we're going to mention some of their statements from their books, inshallah, soon in this speech, inshallah, in this lecture. The Wahhabis, they think because they misconstrue verses from the Quran, and they distort the traditions, the prophetic traditions, the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and as a result of that, let's go back a step. The Wahhabis, they assume that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is some kind of a jism, some type of a spatial entity, something of dimensions and size. They assume that. And then when they read the Quran, and when they read the hadith of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, they misconstrue those verses. And as a result, because of their erroneous, their false and blasphemous assumption about Allah, that Allah Ta'ala is some sort of spatial being, some sort of spatial entity, because they assume that about Allah, they misunderstand certain verses of the Quran, what are called the mutashabihat verses, and we're going to talk about that also, inshallah. That because they misconstrue those verses and hadith, they believe about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He is a giant, unidentified, extraterrestrial object with a smiling face, 2 feet, 1 shin, hands, 2 right hands, and other similar created characteristics. Now they will follow this up. They will follow this up by saying Allah's face is not like our face, or Allah's fingers are not like our fingers, or Allah's tibia, Allah's shin, they claim, is not like our tibia or shin. So they will claim that Allah's body parts are not like ours. But the fact that they believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala occupies space, that Allah ta'ala has a size, that Allah Ta'ala has parts, some parts in one place, other parts in other places, then indeed they are guilty of Tashbih. And in particular, when we say Tashbih for the Wahhabis, we're talking about the resembling Allah to the creation, what is called Tajseem. We mentioned Jism earlier. We said that the Jism, in brief, is something with dimensions and composition. Imam Ahmad ibn Hanbal, whom the Wahhabis claim to follow. The Wahhabis, they claim to follow Ahmad ibn Hanbal radiallahu anhu. Now Ahmad ibn Hanbal, in his Aqidah, the Aqidah of Imam Ahmad, which was written by Abu Fadl At-Tamimi, he mentioned in here, Abu Fadl At-Tamimi mentioned he himself was a genuine Hanbali scholar, because there were people who claimed to follow the school of Imam Ahmad, and they tarnished his school, because those people while they claimed to follow Imam Ahmad, they were people who had a tajseem belief about God, meaning, or jismiya belief about God, that they were people of tajseem, they were the mujassima, again, people who believe that God is some type of a jism, some type of spatial entity. So Abu Fadl At-Tamimi, he wrote a book clarifying the creed of Imam Ahmad, and he mentioned what Imam Ahmad radiallahu anhu said about the jism. He said that the jism is that which has length, which has width, which has depth, which has assemblage, form, and composition. And Imam Ahmad, he said, and Allah is clear of all such characteristics. So Imam Ahmad, he defined what the jism is. It is something with dimensions, something with composition. Now when we look at what the Wahhabis say about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they are explicit in claiming that Allah ta'ala has a form, has a shape, has dimensions, and has composition. They are explicit about that. Now Imam Ahmad also said about those who believe that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a jism, he mentioned what is the judgment regarding them. He said, "Man qala Allahu jismun la kal ajsami kafara." He said, though whoever believes or whoever says that Allah is a jism, but unlike other jisms, ajsam, then he blasphemes. So if the person says Allah is a jism like other jisms, then he blasphemes. If he says Allah is a spatial entity like other spatial entities, he's a blasphemer for sure. Because if someone says Allah is like anything, similar to anything, then he blasphemes. Because Allah Ta'ala revealed, لَيْسَ كَمِثْلِهِ شَيْءٍ, that there is absolutely nothing like Him, absolutely nothing like Allah. So, and Ahmed added more though. He said, "La kal ajsam kafara." That if he said, even if he says, but not like other bodies, he still blasphemes. So the Wahhabi may claim Allah has fingers, eyes, face, foot, 2 feet, 1 shin, but not like ours. He is still talking about a spatial entity. And the one who believes Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is a jism, is a spatial entity, he blasphemes. Let's mention also here that often people will translate the word jism as body. And the Wahhabi will be quick to say Allah is not a body. Meaning, so usually in English when we say body, we're talking about something of flesh, of physical form. And the term jism is not relegated to just that which is of a physical form. So meaning dense material form. So for example, light, meaning the illumination. The light itself is called a jism. It's a latif body. It is a subtle body. The ruh, the soul, it is a jism. It is not a solid, dense body, but it's a body. The images of our mind, those things that have form and shape, they are ajsam, they are bodies. They are not dense physical bodies, but still they are understood as to be jisms, meaning spatial entities. The ruh is a spatial entity. The physical bodies are spatial entities. The light is a spatial entity. Images are spatial entities. And Allah Ta'ala is clear of all jismiyah, all spatial characteristics. This is the belief. So our belief as Muslims, Allah exists and is absolutely categorically different from the creations. The Wahhabi conviction is that Allah is a jism, is a spatial entity, but happens to be a spatial entity not quite like other spatial entities. This is the difference. Now Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, one of the leading imams of this nation who elaborated in detail about the creed, Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and also Imam al-Maturidi. These 2 imams are the imams of Ahl Sunnah when it comes to elaborating on the details of the Islamic creed. And he said, Imam Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari, he said, "Man i'taqada anna Allah jismun, fahuwa ghayru arifin bi rabbihi, wa innahu kafirun bih." He said that whoever believes that Allah is a jism, is a spatial entity, something of dimensions, something of size or dimensions and composition. Whoever believes that Allah is a spatial entity, that he is ignorant of his Lord. And then he said, وَإِنَّهُ كَافِرٌ بِهِ, and that he is a blasphemer in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the scholars of Ahl Sunnah, like Abu Hassan al-Ash'ari and also Ahmad ibn Hanbal, they mentioned explicitly, unequivocally, that the one who deems Allah to be a spatial entity, that such a person does not believe as Muslims believe. Also, Imam Abu Ja'far At-Tahawi, he wrote a famous treatise known as the Aqidah of At-Tahawi, the creed, the doctrine of At-Tahawi, wherein in the very beginning At-Tahawi says that this is an elucidation of the creed of Ahl Sunnah wal Jama'ah in accordance with the scholars of faith, and he mentions Abu Hanifa and Abu Yusuf and Ash-Shaybani. So in this creed that At-Tahawi, he says about Allah Ta'ala عن الحدود والغايات والأركان والأعضاء والأدوات لا تحويه الجهات ست كثائر المبتدعات. So he said that Allah is supremely and gloriously clear of all boundaries, extremities, limits, sides, organs, instruments, appendages, small body parts. لا تحويه الجهات ست كسائر المبتدعات. That Allah is clear of all the six directions. Allah is clear of all the six directions, unlike all of the originated beings. When we look at the objects, all of the bodies that exist in the directions. And let us understand what is a direction. A direction, when we speak of the direction of something, we are comparing the location of one object, one spatial entity. We're comparing the location of one object in relation to the location of another object. We know, Muslims know, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not an object, not a spatial entity. So that tells us that Allah ta'ala is not in a direction. And we know that Allah ta'ala is the creator. That Allah ta'ala created location, place. Before there were locations, before there was place and space, there was a creator. So we know that the creator of place, of locations, is not inside of a location. So since we know Allah ta'ala is not an object, and we know that Allah ta'ala is not in a location, then we know that Allah ta'ala exists, and Allah exists without being in a place. Now, with that said, let's mention another point related to this. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not something, when we say Allah ta'ala exists without a place, we are affirming His existence. We are not denying the existence of Allah. We are affirming that the Creator exists, huwa mawjood, that Allah exists. And then we say, bila makan, without a place, without any partners. Allah is not in need. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is not dependent upon that which is originated. Allah existed before place, without place, and after Allah originated the creations, after Allah originated place, Allah did not transform from existing without a place and then transform and materialize inside of a place or inside of a direction. Allah Ta'ala does not develop, Allah does not undergo change. Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala, as Allah revealed in the Quran, does not resemble anything. Laysa kamithlihi shay. The Creator is not similar to the creations. So, with that background, let's talk now. This is the belief. So we want to clarify first what Muslims believe. And then we mentioned in brief, and we will go into the books of the Wahhabis in a few minutes. We will show explicitly what the Wahhabis say, and that what they say contradicts itself. So let's now go into a little bit of the history of the Wahhabis. If you want to understand something, it's important to understand the background of that thing. The Wahhabis, their movement begins in, let's say that the founder of the Wahhabis, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he was born around the year 1700, about the year 1703. Now, when he was born in the land of Najd. This is a region, if you think, there's the region of Hijaz, which is most familiar to the Muslims. The region of Hijaz is the region that includes Mecca and Medina and Jeddah. This is the western part of Arabia. Najd is in the central eastern region of Arabia. Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab was born in Najd. His father, Muhammad Abdul Wahhab, his father, he saw in his son a proclivity, a leaning towards deviance when he was young. And he warned the people, and he said, I fear that great evil will come from my son Muhammad, meaning Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. Also, his brother, meaning the brother of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the father was a scholar of the Hanbali school. And the brother, Sulaiman was his name, the brother of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he also was a scholar of the Hanbali school. And his brother wrote a book refuting Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, the founder of the Wahhabi movement. The book is called As-Sawa'iqul Ilahiyyah fi Madhhab al-Wahhabiyyah. It is, if you want to translate it, the divine lightning bolts against the madhab, the methodology of the Wahhabiyyah. So again, from way back, the Sunnis have referred to this movement, the followers of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. The Sunnis have referred to them as Wahhabis. Because the Wahhabis, they try to hide their identity. And they will say, oh, there's no such thing as a Wahhabi. The Sunnis called them Wahhabis. Now the Wahhabis will say, oh, the Shia, you must be Shi'i. You must be a Shia if you call us Wahhabis. No, the Sunnis refer to this movement, the followers, this fringe movement, the followers of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. The Sunnis refer to these people as Wahhabis to distinguish them and this heretical and blasphemous movement, to distinguish that movement from the Islamic orthodoxy, meaning those Muslims who are the main body of Muslims on the right path, meaning the methodology of the right path, which is, as we mentioned, Ahlus Sunnah wal Jama'ah. Now, Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, in the mid-1700s, he made an alliance with the Saudi family. That's why the majority of the Arabian Peninsula is called Saudi Arabia. It's not called Arabia. It was not called Saudi Arabia at the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It wasn't called Saudi Arabia 1,000 years after the time of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This state, this regime, was started when Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, he made an alliance with the Saudi family. He married into the Saudi family. And the deal that Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab made with the Saudi family was that he and his family, they would be the clerics, the religious leaders of that regime, of that movement, and the Saudis, they would be the political leaders. And that's what you have today, in current day, what is known as Saudi Arabia. You have the family of Saud. That family has been ruling from generation to generation, and then the descendants of Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab, they have been the leading clerics of this Wahhabi ideology since the time of the rise of this movement in the middle 1700s. Now, regarding this movement, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he prophesied, he foretold the rise of the Wahhabi movement. The Prophet was in a session, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and some of the companions, they asked the Prophet to make dua for their homeland. Some asked him, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to make dua for Ash-Sham. Ash-Sham is what is called Greater Syria. Roughly what is Syria today, Greater Syria, that region. So, and the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he made dua for the Greater Syria and Ash-Sham. And the Prophet was asked, alayhi salatu wasalam, to make dua for Yemen, which is in the southwest corner of Arabia. And the Prophet, alayhi salatu wasalam, he made dua for Yemen. And then a person asked the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam to make dua for Najd, this region of what? Central and Eastern Arabia, the region where Riyadh is located. Riyadh is the capital of Saudi Arabia. The capital of Saudi Arabia is not in Hijaz. It is not in Mecca. It's not Medina. It is not Ta'if. It's not Jeddah. The capital of Saudi Arabia is in Riyadh, in this land called Najd. The Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, after he was asked to make dua several times, he said several times for Najd. He said فيها الفتن والزلازل. He said from there, from that region will come great tribulations. And no doubt, great tribulations have come from this movement, this innovated heresy of Wahhabism, which was not initiated until 250 years ago, coming from this character named Muhammad ibn Abdul Wahhab. And if we look around today, you see groups like the so-called ISIS, the so-called Boko Haram, the so-called Ansaruddin, Ash-Shabab. All of these groups, they are Wahhabi movements. Boko Haram, as they call it, is in Nigeria, in that region in Africa. Ansaruddin, they were menacing the Muslims in Mali, in Africa. Ash-Shabab in East Africa. The so-called ISIS, as you know, as very known now in the media, they have been attacking the Muslims in Ash-Sham. Al-Qaeda, what Bin Laden was affiliated with. All of these movements are under the deep influence of Wahhabism. This is a fact of the matter. Now, some of the Wahhabis, what they will say is, Sheikh so-and-so and so-and-so in Saudi Arabia, they wrote fatwas against these people. These Wahhabis in Saudi, they don't disagree with these extremist radicals in practice, in theory. What they disagree with is some of the details of what they are doing. They agree with the Aqidah, the belief that Allah Ta'ala is a giant jism, a giant spatial entity with body parts. They believe that as Ash-Shabab believes it. They believe that as ISIS teaches it. And the Saudis, the Wahhabis of Saudi Arabia, we're talking about the ones of knowledge in their methodology. We're not talking about some guy in the street who may be ignorant. But those leaders among the Wahhabis, meaning ignorant of the Wahhabi methodology, the leaders of the Wahhabis, they deem the masses of Muslims to be extreme deviants, if not outright blasphemers. This is the methodology of Wahhabism. And we're going to talk about some more of this in their books. So these extremist movements that we see, that whether Boko Haram, so-called ISIS, Ansaruddin, and these other movements, they are all Wahhabis in their methodology.